Bernie, I think you started life in the BBC in about the mid-60s as a cameraman in studios. Is that right?
Well, not exactly a cameraman, more a dragger of cables. Yes, April the 25th, 1966, I went to Evesham for the TO course, the technical operator course, along with 30 odd other people. And then we got to Television Centre. It turned out, I really, really wanted to be a BBC television cameraman. From about the age of 15, when I used to watch them on That Was the Week That Was, I thought, I want to do that. And there I was. But of course, where we were in 1966 was the back end of the great BBC Two expansion. And unfortunately, Tech Ops had sort of overexpanded. They got in too many people. So the people on my course and the next course, we weren't superfluous, but, we weren't going to get to be a cameraman next week. So we were cable bashers largely. We dragged cables around the studio. Now, actually, although that's menial and dirty and horrid, I dragged cables behind Jim Atkinson, who was the top drama cameraman. And I worked on Shakespeare and operas and all kinds of amazing things as Jim's cable basher. So I didn't really lose out entirely. It wasn't, disaster of the age. It was pretty amazing, working away in, say, in TC1 on Romeo and Juliet or whatever.
Yes, quite exciting, I suspect, at the time. And eventually then, presumably, you did become a cameraman.
Yeah, instead of the sort of technical careers in the engineering division that you got as a handout when you applied, said about 3 years, and in fact it was about 7. And I'd worked my way up from, when it was my turn really, from basic trainee cable basher to dolly operator number 1, which is just one down from cameraman. And so I was driving big cranes on big shows by that time. I tipped over a huge Christmas tree on Mantovani once. I did tell them it was gonna, if you park it there, I'll knock it over. And then I did. Anyway, yeah, so then I got to be a cameraman, and I was on the camera pool, and I was doing camera number 5 or 6 or whatever on various shows. I did a handheld camera, one of the earliest handheld cameras on Hunchback of Notre Dame, where I had to be in a cupboard hiding, emulate a person hiding in a cupboard with this camera, which was, a bit of a deal at the time, really.
But, in those days, in fact, I started with turret cameras, did you?
Yes, I did, yeah. Oh, yes. The ME... the ME205, I think, was the black and white camera that had 5 positions on the turret, but only 4 lenses. And you'd be working on, for instance, Softly, and you were always doing fast lens changes from one to another. And if you went the wrong way round the turret, you missed. If you see what I mean, you had to remember which way to turn so you didn't have to go 3 instead of 2. If you watch the Foresight Saga and listen, you can hear what's coming next, because it's all made in TC4 on ME205s, and you can hear the lens changes happening. So you think close up next, and it cuts to a close up, because they go clunk, clunk.
That's funny. Terrible, of course, if you were swinging a lens in vision, but then that's the director's problem.
Oh, well, there was a vision mixer. I assume she's long gone now, called Rachel Blaney. Lovely lady, but she'd learnt, I think, before the war, when there were only 2 monitors in the gallery. And she always, in the olden days, had to preview the next camera so that the racks people could see it and everybody else could see that it actually was there. But she carried on that way of doing it, even when it was long past its moment. And there was a drama director called David Sullivan Proudfoot, who wanted to get a lot of shots into his shows. And if Rachel was doing it, there were times when she couldn't keep up, because she was trying to do it in a more complex manner there. And so she cut to something, and she cut to the wrong camera, and you get like a chorus of lens changes, because when they cut off, someone had changed the lens, and she cut to the wrong camera. So you had clonk, 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 and 3 or 4 lens changes on the top, because people were trying to do whatever they were supposed to do. Interesting world.
Now, were you only at Television Centre, or were you at Lime Grove sometimes with...
the Tech Ops people in West London went to Television Centre, Lime Grove, Riverside and Television Theatre. So, we worked 4 days a week, any hours, any days, and you'd be scheduled on any of them, really. You could be any of those, really. So you could be working on the Val Dunican show live on a Saturday night in the theatre, and Play School in Riverside 1 on Monday, and, I don't know, Nationwide on Wednesday in Lime Grove. So, yeah, we got around.
And it was very hot in those days in studios. I mean, the lighting levels were very high.
Of course, Apollo was famous for that. Everything else mostly it was fine. The aircon worked, apart from when someone went on strike and turned it off. But generally, it worked well. But TC7 for the early Apollos had a white cycle all the way around, and it ran 24 hours a day whilst they were up there. And it got really, really hot. And the cameras, we used to say you could probably fry an egg on the top of an ME 2001. No, you probably couldn't, but it was really, really, really hot.
That's extraordinary.
Yes.
Some studios were colorized, some were not. Is that right?
I can't remember the order now. You'd need to look at Martin Kempton's site, and he might even know. But when I joined, there were 3 studios working at Lime Grove. There was the colour test studio, which I think was still working when I got there, which had the really ancient, huge colour cameras. But I think that went away pretty quickly. So mostly there was E, D, E, and G. G was on the first floor. And that never went colour. We used to do Top of the Pops there every week in Studio G. E had it Nationwide and 24 hours before that. And D often had dramas like Doctor Who or The Newcomers or whatever. So they were all black and white. And then they colourised E and D, but they didn't do anything to G. It just sat there. And it sort of was mothballed. I think they brought it out once, in black and white for something or other, but mostly it just sat there. Eventually, P&ID, the engineering people, did it, and they built the gallery of Presentation Studio A in there, so that when they actually revamped Studio A, they could just take it apart and put the new bit in quite quickly. And it was all built on the floor, on the studio floor. We used to go down and say, I think the monitor stack should just be a bit higher. And they go, yeah, all right. It was very good.
And of course, most things presumably were live. What's the difference between working on a live program and working on a program where you can stop, start and record and so on?
By the time 1966 came along, not everything was live by a long way, but mostly they didn't want to edit too much. So you do a whole section, 1 or 2 or 3 scenes, and then there'd be a recording break. Or on Softly Softly, Len Lewis, who was the producer, had been doing Softly and Z-Cars before I was there live. And he always said, next week, chaps, we're going live again. And we go, oh yeah. But he'd always start us doing the show at whatever it was, 8 o'clock or 7:50 or something or other. And we'd do it in one. And we'd only do retakes for enterprises if they were really necessary, so that, if they sold it around the world, they could do a bit of an edit. But we do it in 50 minutes and no mucking around as live. There was still live drama. 30-minute theatre used to be done live from TC2. But mostly drama by that time was recorded. But light entertainment, of course, was live. Top of the Pops or any of the shows down at the television theatre, Saturday night, Val Dunican or Cilla Black or, I don't know, all those people. Those were live.
Z-Cars was certainly live, because I remember going into the galleries and into the observation galleries and watching Z-Cars going up.
Yeah, Softly followed Z-Cars. Z-Cars ended, and then Softly followed along. And Softly, I don't think it might have been live for the first year, which I wasn't on. But after that, it went recorded, despite Len Lewis not wanting to do that. What was the difference? Well, you had to get it right, didn't you? There was no mucking around. You had to get it right, no matter what it was. I remember working on a Nationwide, and the thing about current affairs was it changed. And so they'd have this nice running order, and you'd look at your list of things you've got to do on the camera, and you'd do it. And I remember one day they changed the running order. I realised that here I was live on the air on BBC One, and the next shot was me on the other side of the studio. And then the director worked it out as well. And, people were shuffling around like mad, but can't quite go from one shot on me to shot on me.
Yes, and trying to work in the cable loop of someone else's camera.
Exactly, yes, or throwing the cable over when you really don't want to because you've got to go back again later on. And the cables are big and fat and heavy too. You didn't really want to get me. And you had an autocue on the front. So the camera was sort of long, so you didn't want to do any of that if you could possibly help it.
So you worked as a cameraman for how long?
Yeah, 5 years, I think, as a full cameraman. It was strange, really, because when I finally was a cameraman, it's not that I didn't want to do it anymore. It wasn't as demanding. You know, you learn things and then it's not demanding, and I needed some demanding things, so I wanted to be more than that. I didn't know what, and as I'd only been to Watford Technical High School rather than Oxford, I was a bit lacking in those sort of qualifications that people like. And I hadn't been in drama or, like entertainment or anything like that in the theatre like people wanted. But there was presentation. Presentation was the department that put the programmes on the air and also made the trails. And they used the two studios on the 4th and half floor, Pres A and B, to do the trails, the weather, and in Pres B, late night lineup and whistle test and anything else that came along that Pres programmes wanted to make. And we used to work there on a 3-month thing on the what was called the AP shift. Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, round and round and round. Anyway, I was up there and I did quite a lot in the trails department for the trails people and got to know them. And I thought, well, I think I could do this. So I applied and I didn't get anywhere. I wasn't surprised, really. So they did mini attachments. You could do a 1 month attachment. So I went around to my bosses and I went around to them and they said, yeah, all right, then you can do a mini attachment. So I was attached to a chap called Chris Bellinger, who later on produced Swap Shop and other such stuff. And Chris got me to do a trail for something called Happy Ever After, the first ever episode, which was later called Terry and June and lasted a long time. And I made it and it worked and I was proud of that. So I applied again. I didn't get the attachment. And meanwhile, I was doing quite well on cameras by that time. People liked me. They asked for me, which was a bit of a surprise, really. So I was sort of less interested and thinking, well, all right, they won't let you in. You build a career as a cameraman and see what you get. But then the attachment opportunity came up once a year, and I applied a third time. And this time, they let me have a board. And I really didn't care so much anymore. You know what I mean? You sort of said, well, all right, you don't want me. I'll give it a go. There's nothing lost. So I went along to the board and I was wearing my jeans from the studio and saying, look, I can't stay there. I've got to get back to the studio and operate my camera. They gave me the attachment. I was astonished. In cameras, there was no turnover at all. Almost. You had to wait till people died or retired or whatever. But in Pres, it turned around quite often. And it was expected that once you started the 3-month attachment, unless you were really rubbish, you were going to stay if you wanted to. And so I did. So I found myself, 3 or 4 weeks in directing BBC Two as a network director, and I'd never been near BBC Two. I'd done the basic training, and I was rotated onto BBC Two, and I said to the editor, I've had no training on BBC Two. He said, you've got the job, get there and do it. What? And so it was a bit scary one way or another, yes. As a network director, there were 2 galleries, network control rooms, one for BBC One, one for BBC Two, and a spare, actually, just in case it all fouled up, which sometimes we had to do and bug out into the spare control room. In, say, the Network One, BBC Network One control room, there'd be a director and there'd be an assistant and there'd be a vision mixer and an engineer. And then round the back somewhere was a continuity announcer in their booth saying, you're watching BBC One. And the network director made it all happen. And so you'd find yourself, sometimes it's really, really hairy, to be quite honest. You'd find yourself running the stopwatch about 3 times during a junction to get to the end of the programme, and running 2-minute lights to a live studio, and the Q dots that we used to have to show them when to run the telecine or whatever it happened to be. It was hairy stuff being a network director, it really was. But it lasted a very short time, so you'd have this really, really scary, especially when you were new, scary thing to do that was really complex. And it would last maybe a minute and a half. And then that was it for, with any luck, half an hour or an hour. And at that point, you'd rush off to the loo.
Yes, absolutely.
It was scary stuff.
It was very important to know where the loos were in those days.
Yeah, luckily, they're right next door. Anyway, and then we had the 2 studios, Pres A and Pres B. And Pres A did the weather and the trails. And the trails part mostly consisted of sticking captions on the wall and panning as a cameraman, making sure the right caption was there. And then we sort of turn around and do the weather with Jack Scott walking across between the tonight and tomorrow charts or whatever it happened to be. Meanwhile, next door, Jimi Hendrix would be playing at full whack. And I remember someone had to actually go round there once and say, look, we're going to do the weather in a sec. Can you all shut up for 5 minutes? Because they'd have live pop groups in there who played really loudly. And I remember working in there once with a Marconi Mark 7 camera, which were enormous, horrible things, horrible cameras, big in a small studio, with Joe Cocker singing I Get By With a Little Help From My Friends, with the backing singers Sue and Sonny doing full pelt. It was really exhilarating to work on, but, very loud.
But meanwhile, on the other side, they were trying to do the weather.
They were trying to do the weather.
Yes, quite. Now, these trails, incidentally, there was also a thing called Noddy, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, famous Noddy.
If you had a breakdown.
A very strange thing, long after the event, some anorak on the internet typed it in as capitals NODD and decided it was an acronym for something or other. And they invented the acronym, but actually it was Noddy because it was a camera, and in front of it was a batch of, a sort of arc of captions which had Temporary Fault and the clock and things like that. And it was just a little Vidicon camera on a motor, and the engineer in the control room would press the button and it would select whichever one they wanted.
Did you have the rotating globe for BBC One?
Yeah, that was there as well. Exactly, that was there, a little mechanical model. The lights would come on, the globe would go round, and the engineer had a sort of luminance overlay thing so that it could be the right colours that they wanted, and they'd twiddle with the knobs to get the colours right. Though mostly they didn't have to because it'd been like that for the last 5 years or whatever. So yes, it had that too. In our world, it wasn't a big deal. It seems to have become a bit of a thing on the internet, that Noddy, people are talking about all the time, but actually it's just a little box room at the side where we ran captions out of.
Yes, quite. Now, during your time before you became a director, you would presumably be on talkback. You would hear directors of various qualities directing studios. How different were directors?
Well, there were all kinds, really.
Some terrible, presumably, and some very good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all kinds. They're people, really. You could work on a drama. I remember working. There's a famous name, Rudy Cartier. He's a famous guy from that era. I didn't realise he was a terrible director until I worked on some of his shows. And he used to ask for Jim Atkinson, Crew 5, and he'd say, "Jim, you will make it beautiful for me." And then Jim would go around swearing and shouting and stuff like that and make it beautiful for him, because Rudy just wasn't that good. He didn't know he was a famous name. And yet, another one, I remember working on Jack Point in TC1, directed by Michael Apted, who did those every 10 years. I can't remember what it's called, the thing where he interviewed children and as they grew up every 10 years, 17 up and 27 up and stuff like that. Died last year, I think. And he was just a joy to work for, Michael Apted. It's just an absolute pleasure to say, he would say, do this, and you'd say, do you want to do that? Oh, yeah, a whole different world. I remember in TC5, there's a famous story of the director whose name you probably know this person, Brenda Horsfield.
Oh, yes.
Brenda was
She died a few years back, aged something like 95.
That's right. She was a glider pilot. But apart from that, she wasn't queen of the directors. And I remember back in the days of turrets, there was the famous instance of the cameraman concerned backing out into the blue T-bar because she'd go wider, and it's back by the door. So he went out into the T-bar. Yes, so there was all kinds. Yes, all kinds.
Now, when you became a director yourself, when you became a proper director, that was still in Prez, was it?
Initially, yes. Yeah, well, actually, for quite some time. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to say, given that my wife was the top network director for many years, that being a network director was not a proper director, because it seriously is. When the Herald of Free Enterprises falls over, or Margaret Thatcher resigns, or can't remember what other thing, Lockerbie, the network director is a serious, no mucking around important person. And also the Falklands War, where news would ring up and and say, we need to go on the air now. There wasn't time to sort of say, I'll just ask my boss if this is all right. You just do it. I didn't, but I was on it by then. So it's a different sort of director, but it's not less director. Anyway, yes, it's a different world slightly. I worked on directing various things. I've just been watching A Change in the Weather on YouTube, which I directed, about the new weather graphics in the early 80s. Yeah, you're working with people rather than, people and machinery. I don't know. I got on all right with that because I'd been a cameraman. Having been a cameraman on the wrong end of this, you knew the right way of doing things because you knew what people didn't like. And you really didn't want a bad-tempered crew. So, yeah, I got on all right with that.
So you're producing things. And, I mean, Pres was a very interesting department. People like my brother-in-law, Ian Johnston, worked there and produced, with Will Wyatt, produced things like the 50s. And the film programme, I think, started there, didn't it?
Yeah, there were 2 film programmes for some time, and Ian was in Vision for some of that. He did the presenter part of it. There was the film programme, and there was Film 72 or something or other, which was various people, and then Barry Norman. For some reason, the department ran both programmes, and presumably, I don't really remember, but did the same films, I don't know. I certainly, as a cameraman, worked on both of them at various times. And I seem to remember for some reason or another, the film programme was done in Pres A in the afternoon, and Film 72 was done live or semi-live in Pres B in the evening, because it was a grow out from Late Night Lineup. I suppose they both were, but yeah.
Now, is it true that Late Night Lineup, which was done live at about, 10:30, something like that?
Yes.
That there was often a large amount of alcohol in the air.
Famous for its hospitality. Yes. Yeah, they had a hospitality room, BO55. And the way hospitality worked in those days was that someone from hospitality would deliver a trolley with the drinks in sometime during the afternoon. And those who weren't required on the show, like the camera crew during the afternoon, if there was no afternoon recordings, they'd say, well, help yourselves, chaps. And they didn't use up the whiskey. Presumably the whiskey and the gin and everything, half empty bottle or whatever, went off to whoever did the hospitality afterwards. So anyway, we'd go down there and we'd have a couple of drinks, and then we'd do the show slightly half cut, and then we'd go back down there again. Of course, there wasn't in those days drink drive laws, otherwise none of us would have driven again. It was late at night and the roads were empty, so it wasn't too bad. Anyway, yes, there was a lot of drink around, and afterwards we'd all go down there. And at some point or another, the security man would come round and say, here, you're supposed to leave left by now. And Tom would say, want a drink? All right. And so we'd be after night drinking and eating crisps or whatever. Yes, it was well known for its hospitality.
Now, you, I think, started to produce Points of View, is that right?
I did.
Points of View, if people don't remember it, I mean, basically you were putting up captions of people's letters or...
Oh, yeah. Basically, yeah, what happened with Points of View was it was always a filler. What happened generally at 8 o'clock or some such time, the BBC would run Dallas or something like that, which ran 50 minutes in an hour slot. The BBC wanted to run an hour slot, but it was only 50 minutes long. So on other days, they'd run an Ealing line and that would run 59, something or other. So that was all right. But if they ran an American show like Dallas, there was a big hole to fill at the back end. And that was why Points of View was invented in the first place. And the idea was that people would write in and talk about whatever they thought about programs, good and bad. And we'd run clips. So you'd run 2 or 3 clips of the programs concerned. There was a lot of green ink. A fair level of green inkiness in it. And, why it's famously satirized. Why, oh, why, oh, why? And thank you, BBC, and other such stuff. Barry always treated it as a, not quite a bit of fluff, but reasonably fluffy, because you would have serious points to be made at times, and he knew how to go from one to the other. So, yeah, we'd run 7 or 8, maybe 10 minutes, depending on, we never ran 10, 7, 8, 9 minutes as a filler, really.
That's interesting. I hadn't realised it was filler in that sense. You know, and you could
No,
almost do it at short notice, I imagine.
Well, you've got to have the letters, and that was always a problem. First off, they'd grab any assistant producer who could vision mix on the day to basically cut the buttons on the vision mixer, which was pretty hairy, because Barry would do one-liners, one-worders, you know, and so we were going cut, VT, cut, VT. As producer, you didn't have to do that because you just sat there and someone else had to do it for you. But yes, I produced a season with Barry, 1982 or 3, maybe something like that. It was pleasant enough. You know, Barry was affable, and of course he had a huge history. Barry is, you know, did all kinds of amazing stuff, and he'd tell you about it over lunch, and then next week he'd tell you about it over lunch again. But well, there you go. Whatever. Later on, I went back to Points of View. I had rather fallen out with the new management from Channel 4, and I was offered a chance to go into exile, basically permanently on Points of View. Probably not, nothing is ever permanent, but you know, it was, for me, it was an escape from something that wasn't going well. The old management had been trying to get me to be a manager, and I was going on management courses and being promoted to this and that and the other and sent to this. And then suddenly the management wasn't there anymore. The new management certainly didn't want someone who was probably a threat. Not that I ever wanted to be a threat, but, you know, a threat to their management. And that's what people do, don't they? They come in and they get rid of all the middle managers and bring in their own people. It's sort of standard practice if you're not in the BBC. And so I think they wanted me to leave, but I didn't, because I couldn't afford to do that. So the offer was, would you like to go to Points of View effectively forever? All right. So off I went to Points of View. It wasn't at that time very busy, Points of View, so I could do things on the side. So, I mean, for one thing, I instituted going out and doing vox pops. So I'd get on an aeroplane to Edinburgh, do some vox pops and stick them in the show, just to change it a bit. The green ink was still there. It really was difficult. Anne Robinson was always Anne Robinson. It was, you know, we just didn't get the material. And then this thing called internet came along, and email. And so I got someone to fix me up with a 9600 baud modem, and someone out there who was my internet service provider. And I had the first ever internet connection in Television Centre. I think maybe the first ever internet connection which wasn't engineering in the BBC. And we used to put the email address on the back end of the programme, and suddenly we had university lecturers emailing in. Suddenly our whole class of discussion on Points of View, you know,
because they were the people that had the internet first.
Yes, and they were very happy to be heard. And once one had got on and people would watch it, because we got 9 million, sometimes 10 million viewers, someone would say, well, I could do that. And we used them. We went in about 3 or 4 weeks from green ink to really, you know, proper, no mucking around, sensible, erudite discussion once we got it. It was really amazing. Yes, so that worked well.
Yeah. The first half of your career is obviously dealing with television equipment that, you know, I remember well, which was, these were heroic days in some ways, heavy duty kit, a lot of engineering support and so on. And then cheaper equipment was beginning to come in, and you got very involved with lightweight cameras, personal editing systems and so on, moving away from the old BBC way of doing things. Tell us about that.
It's Alan Yentob again. At some point, Alan was controller of BBC One, and he wanted Points of View to run 15 minutes. I don't know why. I don't remember why, rather than 10 minutes. And we couldn't really do that with what we had. There was not enough material. So I instituted various things like going to towns and doing sort of background and actual, you know, people doing pieces to camera and things like that, so that we'd have enough to fill up without Anne Robinson having to scrape around desperately looking for more material out of what we had. I was given, because there were only 2 of us on the programme initially, there was me and an assistant, and that was all that's needed. So I had a couple of assistant producers, or an assistant producer and a researcher, I think. But they were effectively being asked, because we had no more facilities, to do stuff. I would be in the office and doing stuff in the office, and they'd go on location. And I'd heard about, well, I already knew about this thing called IDOS Optima, which was a desktop editor based on a BBC Micro. Anyway, I got one in, and so we could edit the rushes in the office that they'd shot. And so I could be in charge of make sure they did it right in the office before they went off to edit for real. Offlining in a way that had never been done before. Non-linear offlining. And no one had done that before. And I had the only Optima in the building doing this. And so we were actually using the Optima to do real stuff. Then presentation was changing again, and I was with points of view, and our new bosses wanted to change presentation, and they hived off the weather to news, and they hived off us to features up at White City. So off we went to White City, taking my Optima with me and carrying on, and the head of the department was being lent on by John Burt to do digital things. I'm not sure that the boss knew what that... In fact, I know she didn't know what that was, and neither did any of the rest of us, really. But it just so happened at that point in life, in time, Sony had come out with this thing called digital video, DV, and a camera called a VX1000. And the pictures were astonishing. And I got hold of one because, I was being asked to do digital things. I rented one from someone or other. And we all looked and we all went, wow. I remember giving a lecture in a conference chamber at Broadcasting House to a lot of big people, showing this camera, and people going, wow. Because they could see that if it's a small camera, you don't need a huge crew. Now, you might want to stick with a crew because, you can't work the thing. But now you only need 2 people instead of 3 or 4. Anyway, I was approached by Caroline van den Brul of Science, saying that she had been asked... She used to produce Hospital Watch, and Hospital Watch was a program which they did sort of live-ish with inserts at a big hospital like Addenbrooke's. And there would be huge OB trucks and big towers and things like that. Cost a fortune stuff, and they'd do it for a week or 4 days. She wanted to do one in a cottage hospital in the morning rather than in the evening. And they said morning budgets don't go to millions of pounds. You can have £250,000 for this. And so Caroline said, this new technology you've got, will it do, can you do it? And I said, I think so. Let's see what we can do. And so we did. We ended up in a cottage hospital in Northumberland, and we had 3 DV cameras, and we taught the producers who were going to be... Basically, as I said, as a cameraman, you learn simple things in a short time. You learn complicated things in a long time. And all you're going to be doing is pointing at close-ups and MCUs. It's simple stuff, so you can learn in a short time what cameramen learn in a short time, and you should be able to do it quicker, because you already know what you want, because you're all film producers. And so we had 3 kits. I operated one, and we had 2 other people operating the other ones. And we made all the films on DV.
Let's get this clear. When those DV cameras came in, firstly, they were standard definition, weren't they? And only later became high definition.
Yeah, they were standard definition 4:3. There's one in a box behind me here. After the show was over, because they were bought on the show budget. And what happens to things that are bought on a show budget? Well, technical things don't, it never used to work like that. Nobody bought technology on a show budget. So they were sort of left over. So I kept one, and I was using it in the service of the BBC till I left, and it's still here. Still nearly works. Sort of a bit of history now.
Well, I got involved with similar sort of low-end production. And we did a multi-camera concert at the festival hall with the BBC Symphony Orchestra using DV cameras.
Brilliant.
And that was another thing that came out of the creative group. I think it was Rowley Keating who suggested the challenge, of trying to do it with DV cameras.
I did one in the Royal Albert Hall for a show called The Frame, which is an art show called The Frame, which was broadcast on some channel I've forgotten the name of, which didn't exist. It came and went, that channel. But we took 3 DV cameras, and there was a Havana nightclub act, terribly glitzy. It looked, we recorded them for an hour, as in start the tape and don't stop it until I tell you to. And we only wanted about 2 minutes. It looked amazing and cost nothing. It cost a ridiculously small amount of money.
So you started working with this sort of kit and making programs with it, but then you got involved with training.
Yeah, everybody's having their budgets reduced all the time. Everybody's trying to make a way of doing things. And I started being asked to train people from Crime Watch and the like. There was a lot of stupidity at the time from production people who were arts graduates. Because I remember people saying, people would say, well, it's just like a camcorder at home. And of course it's not. It is like a camcorder at home, but it's about the operator, not about the machine. And so they'd send really junior people out to do camcorder stuff and then complain when it came back looking terrible, because they didn't train the people properly. We'd had, when we did it for morning surgery, we'd had a fortnight training very experienced film producers to do this. They were sending out junior researchers just out of school doing it. And it was sort of embarrassing, really, because the crews who I knew then and still know now would say, well, this is rubbish, you're all idiots. And I'd say, you're right. It is possible, but this isn't it. But the writing was on the wall. It wasn't going to be a big film crew or even a medium-sized film crew anymore. That was the way it was. Programs, a lot of programs, especially the ones on the peripheral channels, BBC 4, whatever it was called then, and BBC 3, whatever it was called then, and the other UK channels we were supplying material to did not have enormous budgets, and there wasn't a way of doing it.
There was an awful lot of material shot where the face was in the middle of the screen rather than at the
terrible stuff.
Terrible stuff.
Terrible.
And and the background was in focus and the foreground was not.
Oh yeah. I'm working on the frame. At some point or another, the production manager lady was the last person left to do some interview for the Orange Prize, maybe something like that. Anyway, she had put the camera in automatic because it was easier that way, but cameras rather like to focus on things that aren't faces. And so she'd put it in automatic, and the camera had focused on a vase of flowers behind the person being interviewed. And she hadn't grasped this. I mean, she should never have gone out doing it, but she was the last person standing, and we had no budget and no people and stuff like that. And she came back and she said, Bernie, it's out of focus. What can you do about it? Answer, nothing. Nothing at all. Can't show that. There is a limit to what we can show, and not that. There you go.
So, moving towards the end of your BBC career, because I think you went freelance, didn't you, when you left? Tell us about the end of your BBC career.
Okay. Yes. There used to be an ad for buying gas shares or something. Oh, no, the National Lottery, when it first came out, with a big hand that came down and said, it's you. And for a while, it was me. It was astonishing, really. I'd gone from Bernie, who various people had in the early 90s put upon quite hard one way and another, to Bernie the guru, and I was being asked to do this and that and the other, and I was working on this and that and the other, here and there for this department and that department, because I knew stuff that nobody else did. I wasn't, as a person who tried to hide it, I'd tell them how it was done properly. So it was a bit of a high thing, and within a few weeks, I'd accepted doing a lowdown for BBC Children's. Lowdown was, Eric Rowan used to produce this series of documentaries, and I did a lowdown on DV, and then we edited it on Optima, offlined it on Optima in my office. And I worked on how buildings learn for arts. So I did those ones, and that all came out well. Then I was asked, they'd employed this nice lady as a money funnel, really, and they'd given her £1 million to do training on things that needed training. A big deal was that serious producers were being made serious producers far too quickly, because there was no choice, because Keep Your Game went so quickly. So you'd have serious producers who knew nothing about handling people and budgets and the like. Suddenly they'd been an assistant producer last week, and now they were running this massive great show. And so on the side, I was attached, amongst other things, to this training department where I was the supplier of expertise and funneler of money to the television part of it. On the side, I said to the lady concerned, I can't do this unless I actually make programs. So I made several things for people, including a half-hour documentary about bomb disposal men, amongst other things. Anyway, along came Greg Dyke, and Greg Dyke thought this is rubbish, as it was. And and he wanted to change everything. And so the department I was attached to was about to disappear. And I was working on the 6th floor. We worked out of the human resources office in the 6th floor. And I, by that time knew the HR people very well, and we all got on very well. And I was the pet producer. I was the one who went out and made television, so they liked that. And the woman who did the nitty-gritty of the HR for television said, "Thing is, Bernie, the department's disappearing, and you'll have to go back to features who haven't used you in years. If you became a full-time member of the department, like manager of the series producer development scheme, which is what you're doing anyway most of the time, you would be either redeployed or made redundant." And I went, Anyway, I went home, and I remember waking up at 3 a.m. and working the sums, and I thought, I'm out of here. I'm 53 years old, I am out of here. So I went back, said, yes, great, can I be made redundant, please? I went to some central HR lady, a broadcasting house, and she said, "Before I tell you how much money you're going to get, will you marry me?" All right, okay. Anyway, so off I went, 53 years old, pension as if I was 60, large separation, dolloped enough to pay off the mortgage. I was home free. I left on Friday, and the next Thursday I was lecturing at Evesham, BBC Evesham, about something or other. And then John Tether, who I'd worked for making various things in the past, who ran the weather, asked me to be duty producer on a sort of daily basis now and then, 4 or 5 shifts a month, because the weather people had been complaining there weren't enough BBC people around in the evenings. So he sort of instituted duty producer. So I did that for a while. At the same time, I had, emailed everybody I knew. The Royal Television, I'd lectured a lot for the Royal Television Society, and so I knew quite a few people, and I emailed everybody. And Noel Smith, who was head of Lord High Everything Else at RTE in Dublin, emailed me and said, "Can I talk to you?" And so I was interviewed by head of everything RTE next door to Harry Ramsden in Terminal 1 for about an hour or two. He flew over, we talked. Anyway, I spent 2 years then teaching the same stuff as I've been teaching at the BBC, zipping backwards and forwards business class to Dublin for 2.5 years, which was quite good.
The thing I always associate you with is the TechOps website, because you're very active in trying to keep these technical issues alive, and I think that's terrific. Tell me something about it.
It was a bit of an accident, frankly. I don't know if you remember, when you got dial-up internet at home, we had free serve dial-up internet, and they gave you a megabyte to put pictures on this internet thing, a web page. I had, back in the days of being on cameras, they used to take pictures of us. They'd have a sort of crew and cast pictures. And I'd lost mine in the final days of Points of View, and I thought I'd left them in the office when I left. And I was really sad about this. And then I found them here under a pile of magazines. And so I scanned them and put them on the thing and showed, because they were TechOps pictures, I showed some TechOps people and said, "Look, there's us. Anyone got any pictures?" People started sending me pictures. And so I went up from a megabyte to buying a website, and it's been running ever since, and it gets bigger and bigger. It gets bigger and bigger. There's always something coming along. It gets bigger and bigger. So it was more of an accident than anything else. A little adjunct to that was, of course, I collected email addresses, and eventually I thought, let's have lunch. Someone had retired and I'd missed it, and I said, let's have lunch. And he said, why don't we invite everybody else? So we did. We invited a load of people, and we've been doing it ever since, apart from COVID. Lots of technical people having lunch together who sometimes haven't met for 30 years. So it's an accident, really, because I had left TechOps 20-odd years beforehand, but somehow it's just carried on that way. So
a lot of the correspondence on the TechOps website is really sort of complaining about standards slipping and so on. You worry about things like sound levels not being equal. What's your view of the technical quality now to BBC's output?
Mostly within programs, it's fine, isn't it? But the strange things like the South East news is always at a different level to the news that was before it. And you think, why can't you fix this? It's sort of straightforward enough. It's ridiculous. But actually, of course, it's massively complex. You know, once upon a time, there was a BBC One network control room and everything went out from there and people sort of jumped in and out of it further down the line. Now there's this version and there's that version and there's something else and there's something else. It's grotesquely complex to make it all happen. It used to be that, you know, you'd have an STLE at the end of the desk saying they're over modding a bit, pull it down or whatever. There isn't anymore. They just don't have the people. The lady I worked for at Kingston University for some years after I left, she had been a director at CNBC. And at CNBC, they had one person, you know, all the sound, all the vision, all the effects, all the graphics were all coordinated by just one person. And I think the BBC is sort of getting that way as well, that there aren't the people anymore. And that's probably why. Meanwhile, of course, the actual technical quality goes up. We're in high definition. It looks good most of the time. You can work in conditions that you couldn't work before. Down the line from someone on their phone, holding up their phone in some terrible place works perfectly well.
Yes, consumer journalism.
I don't take a camera on holiday anymore. I've got a perfect phone that turns out perfectly good video and sound. The mic, of course, is on the camera, which isn't what you want generally, but for that sort of thing, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we've covered it, Bernie. It's full of very interesting detail. So I think thank you very much.
Oh, a pleasure.